Good afternoon, everybody. We've got a lot of content to cover today, so we're going to jump right in. I know we've still got a couple of people filtering in, but hopefully we'll get them caught up as we're going through our introductions here. My name is Sean Maurer. I'm an engineer at CDAC. Joining me today is my colleague Ryan Siegel. We'll be covering updates to the 2021 IECC. We'll also be touching on some of the proposed Illinois amendments to that as well. So just a couple of things we're covering today. We're going to be identifying new energy code compliance requirements that were not in previous versions of the IECC. Then we'll be touching on some of the updates to existing requirements, evaluating the impact of those updates on compliance procedures, and then we'll be touching on the Illinois amendments as well. CDAC is a preferred education provider with the IECC, and we also provide continuing education credits through AIA. At the conclusion of this webinar, you'll receive an email with the completion certificate for attending the webinar, and that'll have a form link on it. Enter that form, put your AIA member number in there, and we'll report those credits for you. Who we are at the Smart Energy Design Assistance Center, we are an applied research program at the University of Illinois based at the Urbana-Champaign campus. And our mission is to reduce the energy footprint of Illinois and beyond. And the Energy Codes training program is one method for us to achieve that goal. As we go through our presentations, if you have questions, please enter them into the Q&A window located at the bottom center of your screen or top center of your screen, depending where your menu bar is at. If you do enter a question into the chat, we may not see it and miss it. If you put it in that Q&A window, it helps ensure that we answer your question. If we don't get to it during the webinar, then we have it on record. We can reach out to you afterwards. This presentation is sponsored by the Illinois State Energy Office. We thank them for supporting our efforts to bring technical assistance and training for energy code to professionals. As part of our code training program, we do have a technical support for designers and code officials. You can reach out to us at energycode@illinois.edu is our preferred means of outreach, as it gives us a chance to pass your question around the office and ensure we get you the most correct answer that we can. But we do have an 800 number for quick technical assistance. If you need a quick call, that is available as well. We also have a number of online resources available at our website, smartenergy.illinois.edu/energy-code. Those include recordings of our previous workshops and webinars, some online self-paced training courses, links to our technical support phone number and email address, as well as energy code resources, such as links to the codes themselves. So we do have updated links to the 2021 IECC at our site. We also have will update once the Illinois amendments are published. We'll get those linked as well. And we also have a link to the Chicago Energy Conservation Code. As well as energy code training, we are doing a building energy education fundamentals training program. So this is more introductory into why energy codes are important, how to make buildings energy efficient, and the benefits of energy efficiency for buildings overall. So this is kind of community college course-based material. If you're interested in looking at that material, you can find it at the link shown on this screen. Again, that is fairly introductory material, but does give a sound basis for people that are new to the building energy codes industry or want to learn more about building energy efficiency and the impacts. So today's webinar is part of a series, is the last one in our series of webinars. We do have one workshop remaining in June for testing and verification requirements in the energy code. So please do join us for those. So first thing that we're going to touch on for the 2021 IEC updates are just updates to the thermal envelope provisions. The big thing is for commercial buildings, they are now also going to be required to have a thermal envelope certificate similar to what's required for residential buildings. The example shown on screen here is a residential one, but it'll be very similar for commercial buildings. You have to display insulation R values for the envelope and ducts that are outside conditioned space. Window U factors, solar heat gain coefficients, and envelope air leakage results, as air leakage testing is now required for commercial buildings in the 2021 IECC. So just like with the residential, it has to be installed in a approved location. Usually it's going to be a utility and mechanical room near the primary power switch for the building, where the primary electrical conduit's coming in, but could also be on a primary piece of mechanical equipment somewhere nearby. And that also has to be included in the construction documents as well. If you've got multiple envelope types, you can display area weighted averages for those on this form. As we do know, commercial buildings, unlike residential, tend to have multiple different styles of envelope put together, such as curtain walls and mass walls, or mass walls and framed walls. So you can account for that with an area weighted average overall for the building instead of reporting multiple assembly R values. There were some updates to low energy building requirements. So they expanded exceptions and added in specific requirements for greenhouses. So for a greenhouse must meet the low energy building requirements that are already stipulated in the 2018 IECC, or have opaque envelope assemblies that meet the insulation requirements for the envelope, have a partition between the greenhouse and conditioned buildings that meets that requirement, and then has specific requirements for fenestration. And so those requirements for greenhouses have been added in for clarity, where previously greenhouses were a separate exception for the 2018 IECC. So now they have specific greenhouse requirements in the 2021 IECC. For equipment buildings, minor change here in the applicable floor area. It's been expanded from less than or equal to 500 square feet up to 1,200 square feet. Otherwise, for equipment buildings, these are things like radio tower building or something like that, where there's no primary occupancy usage in that building. It's just storing equipment. So most of the requirements are the same, but they have allowed those to expand in size and still qualify. And then there are updates to the R value and U factor tables. We've tried to summarize them here. If you see a green block, it's been improved over the 2018 IECC. I won't get into all of them in detail, but note that unlisted items such as insulation above roof were not changed at all. So if you don't see a row here, those requirements stayed the same between the 2018 and 2021 IECC. So we just highlighted here what has changed, what those improvements were. And so again here, for just the rest of that table, covering the rest of the changes, there was an update to some of the footnotes. Again, since insulation has increased for floors and attic spaces, there is a note there that steel floors need to be insulated to R38. If you're not doing a mass floor or wood framed floor, that was removed in the 2021 IECC. They also added horizontally hinged doors with a single row of fenestration. So this is kind of typically seen at kind of the restaurant patio situation, where they've got an overhead door that can raise up and expose a seating area as an outdoor patio. Those typically have some fenestration in it. So that's been added in as a component here for the 2021 IECC. So some footnote changes to that table that might be missed if you're not looking carefully. For roof and ceiling insulation in the 2018 IECC, they had an R value basis in the specific requirements right up there. You had to have the 2 layers of staggered insulation. Insulation could not be placed on suspended ceilings and counted as part of the thermal envelope. And there was some confusing wording where they had 3 stipulations for tapered insulation above roof deck that have been clarified in the 2021 IECC. They've updated that language to be on a U factor basis instead of the R value basis. And they've clarified the tapered insulation, which we've listed here. So they've greatly simplified that wording, made that easier to interpret, where a lot of confusion was kind of developed around that tapered insulation requirements. Here, the format is a big change for fenestration requirements. So note that change here between the 2018 and 2021 IECC. The big thing is that instead of orientation having an impact on the solar heat gain coefficient, now it's whether it's fixed or operable framing combined with the projection factor. So instead of orientation, it's going to be based on whether that window is operable or not. Some of the U factors have been slightly reduced, but the big change there is that instead of considering orientation, they're considering whether the window is fixed or operable. And then for minimum skylight area, the 2021 has added an exception for skylighting in areas that are designated as storm shelters per IECC 500. So if there's a storm shelter, you don't necessarily want to have glass in the ceiling on that storm shelter, as that presents a hazard in a tornado. So that exception has been added, and then there are updates to the minimum skylight area requirements. So they've changed those to account for visible transmittance of that, as well as a weighting factor for tubular daylighting. So they're accounting for here is that tubular daylighting has kind of grown in usage. It wasn't really accounted for in the previous energy code. They just had this typical box frame skylighting. So they've added some of these requirements to account for tubular daylight devices. But the big change here that I think most people are concerned with is the air leakage requirements for commercial buildings. So the 2021 IECC has made this a requirement for climate zones 4 and 5. There are some exceptions, but they don't fall in our climate zones. So all commercial buildings must have air leakage testing done. Slightly different requirements. Dwelling and sleeping units kind of fall in line with the multifamily requirements for residential, and that it has that lower 50 Pascal test pressure. And there is a sampling protocol in place. For all other commercial buildings, the test pressure is 75 Pascals and has to be that 0.4 CFM per square foot of exposed envelope area. But again, for commercial buildings, they do have a sampling protocol in place, which is going to be particularly useful for large commercial buildings. All areas under a roof need to be tested. All stories with an entrance to the outdoors need to be tested. But then for any middle floors or floors that don't have direct access to the outdoors, only 25% of a representative portion of the envelope needs to be tested for those areas. There is also an exception in here. If you don't meet that 0.4 CFM per square foot leakage rate, but you're less than 0.6 CFM per square foot, you can do non-destructive repairs and not retest the envelope. So there is a little bit of leeway built in here if you don't exactly meet the testing requirements. The idea being that if you do some of these non-destructive repairs and this testing has been done early enough in the construction process, that these corrections will get you down close to that 0.4 CFM per square foot target. Another addition is for operable openings and interlocking of HVAC equipment with those operable openings. So for the this is a brand new requirement for the 2021 IECC. Again, accounting for these restaurant spaces that have these convertible enclosed to open patio spaces with these overhead doors. So they've added requirements and specific details for how to make those compliant with the energy code here. I will hand it over to my colleague Ryan to go over the mechanical sections.
Well, thank you, Sean. I do believe there was a question, just wanted to make sure to clarify as far as the insulation above a lay-in ceiling. I believe that the 2021 still does not allow that to be counted as part of the thermal envelope. Is that correct?
That is correct, because that ceiling tile can be lifted and moved and displace that insulation. that does not count as being part of the thermal envelope. That is correct.
Okay. So there may have been a wording change, but it was a clarifying
Yeah.
update there. So, okay. So mechanical, we've got a few different things. Data centers now have a specific thing for them for referring them back to Ashrae 90.4. So that's a specific Ashrae standard for data centers. And again, understanding that there are some different, classifications and helping to identify when do you move to 90.4 versus when is it just part of an IT closet. So there are a few attributes for helping to select that. Also, we have greatly expanded fault detection and diagnostics. Previously, it was just for economizers. Now for larger buildings, so this is over 100,000 square feet, now you have to do building automation system fault detection and diagnostic. Generally, this is going to be done through the building automation system, but also calling out not only that it's identifying and reporting the faults and notification of that, but also being able to prioritize what that recommendation repair is. So it can't just tell you, hey, there's a problem, but it has to give you some indication as far as what that repair needs to be. So that's a big piece. I know this is something that system providers have been working to integrate over the last several years, and so now code is going to be requiring that for it. So something that we do note is there is an upcoming change to the federal minimum efficiency standards for equipment. So January 1st of 2023. So this comes up in just over 7 months here. And so just being aware that these are changing. So the code just reflects that the minimum equipment efficiency standard is the code minimum. And so wanting people to be aware, and so updating your equipment requests as far as part of your design to make sure that you're meeting the new equipment standards. In particular, trying to make sure that you're specifying the most current equipment and not something that someone's had on a shelf for a while. So while it may have been previously manufactured, trying to make sure that you get the best product for your clients. So that's coming January 1st, so real soon. As far as also added minimum requirements as far as flow rates per horsepower, and so trying to drive down this fan, how much water is going through that tower for your fan horsepower, and understanding that because your primary energy loads for heat rejection are going to be your chiller, followed by your pumping, and then finally your fan in your cooling towers, and so trying to help drive that efficiency. Chillers have dramatically made improvements, as have pumps, and now they're going after the cooling towers and helping to bring that up. So this is something that also we're noting here as far as the BTU for horsepower. There has been some changes in testing, and so that's where some of these pressures and flows have changed as well. So being cognizant of these current testing standards. Also, here the tables have broken out in a little bit more detail. Previously it was just air cooled. Now actually breaking it down based on the different types of cooling towers and the computer room efficiency. So trying to really help dial in and understand that just by equipment selection alone and just choosing a particular method, it works, but we really need to do a better job of that. And so they've really helped expand this table. Computer rooms, and particularly data centers. So this is something that, again, Ashrae 90.4 is going to be working to address as well. So, also for HVAC controls, moving towards the optimum start and optimum start, or optimum start and optimum stop, that is, and trying to help add some coasting in. So understanding that a room, generally speaking, doesn't get uncomfortable immediately after the system turns off or sets back, helping to coast that building into the minimal occupancy time. So there is some additional exceptions for economizers for VRF, utilizing dedicated outdoor air systems. This is something we have had several questions on and over these last couple of years, is saying, hey, how do we bring, economizers with VRF? Because VRF generally has very high efficiencies. The code is kind of recognizing that and allowing some exceptions to avoid having to add economizers where it's really difficult to do. So also for supply air reset, moving towards humidity-based reset as more programming has come into play, trying to help bring some of these current and more modern control sequences into the code to make allowances and provisions for them. Demand controlled ventilation, we're seeing a dramatic expansion of this. So including single zone systems and decreasing this occupant load. Previously, the threshold was 25 people per 1,000 square foot. Now it's 15 people per 1,000 square foot. They've also changed some of the exceptions, allowing for some of the makeup and transfer air systems that we see a lot of times in restaurants and things like that. And part of this is also understanding occupancy classifications. And so, there's some of these, correctional cells and educational labs, and several of these occupancy classification exceptions, these are places where we either have near continuous occupancy like correctional cells, or we're likely going to be ventilating for reasons other than people, barber shops and salons and bowling alleys. These are areas that we're providing ventilation air generally for removal of VOCs and other pollutants beyond just the human occupants. And so that's part of the reason why they've added some of these exceptions. Enclosed garage ventilation, this is one area where there was a substantial difference between Ashrae 90.1 and the IECC. Here we've seen the IECC really bring that capacity down for enclosed garage ventilation, requiring demand controlled ventilation for these spaces, and trying to catch some of these, I'll say smaller parking garages. But I mean, 8,000 CFM is still a fair bit of air there. Also adding some more energy recovery systems. Previously it was just a single section, and then 11 exceptions were within that. The IECC really tried to pull this apart and help guide people as far as non-transient dwellings need to have energy recovery, but they have kind of worked on that as far as that recovery ratio. And so that's something that the 2021 IECC has pulled out, is that non-transient dwellings, because apartment buildings may be classified as commercial buildings. So we have likely continuous occupancy in a lot of these, particularly as more and more people have transitioned to working from home. So guest room controls, this is just a timing change, very similar to a lot of the other occupant controls, moving from 30 minutes to 20 minutes. So that's kind of in line with those. And fans, the IECC is now being moved as working to drive, with more and more VFDs being installed, or variable speed drives, helping to bring some of those exceptions into the code rather than just purely based on nameplate horsepower. So, the other thing is we're moving from fan efficiency grade to a fan efficiency index. The fan efficiency grade was predominantly focused just on the fan assembly itself and how efficiently it was able to move air, whereas the fan efficiency index is looking at the entire fan system. So it even includes like what variable speed drive you're including with that, fan arrays rather than single fans. And so it's looking for that ratio of, are you selecting equipment that is close to or in alignment with, the best efficiency point of those. So along with that transition, they have moved from 6 exceptions up to 11. So we have seen a little bit of an expansion in that list. So not too much in service water heating updates, a little bit of an efficiency gain required for these larger systems over 1 million BTUs an hour for domestic hot water. So that's a little bit of something to note. And with that, I'll turn it over to Sean to talk a little bit about power and lighting.
Okay. There we go. So some quick updates here for occupancy sensors in warehouses. They've added in a couple of requirements into 21 IECC. So lighting not controlled by sensors shall be on a time clock, and manual off control shall be provided. Just some clarifying points, kind of lines up with other portions of the code where automated controls were already mandated to have manual controls. They've added that clarification into the warehouses as well. Open plan office controls also gets an update. Auto on is permitted in occupied zones, and then other unoccupied zones can turn on to 20% or less. An exception allows time switch control here as well now, and lights shall automatically turn off to 20% of full power after 20 minutes. So the main takeaway here for these updates is that they're allowing a little more flexibility with the lighting on-off control as far as that 20% minimum energy, providing some safe passage lighting through areas that someone might walk through, but they're not occupying that portion of the office. They're moving to another area that's under a separate control system. For corridors, new to the 2021 IECC, they are adding in occupant sensing control for hallways that was not included in the 2018 IECC. Just a 50% reduction within 20 minutes of the hallways being unoccupied. There is an exception for hallways that already have reduced lighting output. So if you're not trying to make a brightly daylit corridor, it's kind of dimly lit. It's that 2-foot candle requirement there. Then you don't have to have the automatic turn down of the lighting. Light reduction controls has added some exceptions for certain spaces. So if there's one luminaire less than 60 watts, then light reduction controls aren't required. If there's less than 0.45 watts per square foot, corridors, lobbies, electrical, mechanical rooms. So continuous dimming of all luminaries from full down to 20% or less, switching all luminaries to output between 30 to 70%, and alternating luminaires between a level of 30 to 70% are acceptable control methods now. So just some updates to those light reduction controls, where the previous 2018 IECC had kind of some basic language. They've added a little more definition and a few more requirements here in the 2021. Daylight responsive controls, bringing this more in line with Ashrae 90.1. They've added the secondary side lit zone requirement that is in the Ashrae requirements. So it kind of works similarly to the primary side lit zone. If you've got adequate daylight, the lights in this secondary zone should be dimming as well. So just expanding the daylight zone requirements essentially. Question did come into the chat: are corridors added to the occupancy sensor list? Yes, but they do have specific requirements, which we showed. Something else for daylight responsive controls added here. Each zone must have at least 150 watts of controlled lighting. That's for the primary zone, and then separately for the secondary zone. So each primary and secondary zone both need to have at least 150 watts of controlled lighting in each, 300 watts total for both of them. Secondary side lit zones shall be independently controlled from primary side lit zones. So you couldn't use the same daylight sensor. It needs to have its own sensor. But again, this is just bringing us more in line with Ashrae 90.1. The IECC did add in limits for exterior shading projection factors to this. So that if you've got exterior shading projection factors, then depending on the depth of that projection, you may have enough shading that daylighting controls aren't feasible. So they do have these couple of final requirements here where if you have adequate shading, then daylighting controls don't make sense in those spaces. The 2021 IECC also added in a section, again, coming in line with 90.1 for how to handle multi-story atriums. So this just falls in line with the 90.1 Ashrae requirements. For parking garage controls, this is a new section to the 2021 IECC. They've added in daylighting controls and occupant sensor controls for parking garages, specific to those spaces. So lighting shall have occupancy sensors or time switch controls. It's going to reduce power in the garage by 30% or more when unoccupied for more than 20 minutes. Control zones are limited to 3,600 square feet per zone, and perimeter lighting should have daylight controls to 20 foot inward from the edge with a 50% reduction or more. There are exceptions to the daylighting controls on the exterior if you've got a limited window to wall ratio, less than 40% of that opening to the garage. There's also an exception if you've got less than 1.5 foot candles of lighting in the space, then you don't want to dim that anymore, taking into consideration some safe passage and safety lighting requirements there. So if you limit the amount of light output in your garage, you don't need to have these control requirements. If you design the perimeter to have limited solar exposure with that less than 40% opening to wall ratio, then you don't need to have those daylighting controls. Or if you've got exterior obstructions that are going to prevent daylighting. Those are all going to give you some exceptions to those requirements. There have been some general updates in reducing lighting power density requirements for spaces here. So we went through the building area method and checked those off, but you can see similar reductions to the space by space method that kind of align with these building area methods. So for the most part, everything has seen a reduction, kind of bringing them more in line with LED lighting technologies, allowing for much lower lighting power densities in some spaces. For exterior lighting power density, there were no updates to those limits. So those have remained about the same. Again, bringing the IECC more in line with Ashrae 90.1, there are now new plug load requirements. So they have automatic receptacle controls and details on the control methods for those. Certain exceptions are allowed in the 2021 IECC for plug load controls. So receptacles for 24/7 mandatory equipment, spaces where automatic control creates a hazard, in individual cubicle spaces, and spacing of controlled outlets. So the exceptions are for 24/7 mandatory equipment and spaces where automatic control creates a hazard. And then there's a spacing requirement here as far as the space between controlled outlets that can be expanded in cubicles, allowing a little bit more flexibility for those types of spaces. In terms of power monitoring requirements, this has been added and expanded in the 2021 IECC. So energy monitoring is required for buildings greater than 25,000 square feet. Submetering is required for HVAC systems and service water heating, lighting systems, plug loads, process loads, and then miscellaneous loads, other circuits. That needs to report to the BAS system and needs to store that data for 36 months, 3 years, and generate a graphical report. So the main consideration here is you want to be able to track equipment energy consumption and help identify where there might be control issues or maintenance issues in the building and identify those more quickly, send an automated alert to building maintenance and operating personnel so that they can track that down and maintain the building's efficiency over time. Is the main goal of these additions to the IECC. Looking at our additional efficiency measures here, they have been expanded in the 2021 IECC with 3 new options. So they've added energy monitoring where it's not already required in the code, some additional fault detection where it's not already required, and then more efficient kitchen equipment. These efficiency packages have been updated as far as how they're employed as well. You now need to obtain 10 credits in efficiency through these efficiency packages instead of just picking one and adding it to your building. So there are multiple tables. We've included an excerpt of them here that based on your climate zone and the efficiency package you've selected, how many credits you will obtain for that efficiency package. You can see some of these, like reduced lighting power, get you most of those 10 credits really quickly. Some of the others, you've got to do more to get those credits, like the HVAC improvements. So slight change in how those efficiency packages are implemented. It's now credit-based instead of just pick one and deploy it. So just an example of how this would work. Let's look at an HVAC efficiency example here. The 2018 IECC had a baseline requirement for 10% efficiency improvement to qualify for the efficiency package. Now in the 2021 IECC, 10% improvement doesn't obtain your full 10 credits, but for most buildings, it's about half of that requirement, a third to half of that requirement. If your efficiency exceeds that 10% credit, you do get more credit added to the system. So you can see a calculation at the bottom here. For each percent beyond the 10% up to a 15% increase, you do get additional credits added onto your efficiency package. So again, driving for these higher efficiency HVAC systems, giving you more credit for doing a little bit more to do higher efficiency technologies. But you can see here, depending on the efficiency packages you select, you're probably going to have to pick at least 2, probably 3, to meet the additional efficiency package requirements now. The efficient kitchen equipment here for Group A2 facilities with a commercial kitchen that include gas or electric fryers, dishwashers, steam cookers, ovens. Those need to comply with these requirements for this efficiency package. So there are tables of equipment efficiencies. The equipment must be installed prior to a certificate of occupancy, again, for verification purposes. You do get a significant amount of credit for these. It's 20 times the kitchen area divided by the building area. So it's a weighted average credit of kitchen area to building area. But all equipment must meet the requirements of this section to qualify for this So if you have certain kitchen equipment installed that doesn't meet these requirements, then as a whole, you can't claim the credit. Most of the tables, just as a note to help understand those as you're looking through the code yourselves, have requirements for cooking load efficiency and a metric for standby and idle power use. On top of being efficient while in operation, they also have to have minimal energy consumption when they're in standby or not in active use. And with that, I will turn it back over to Ryan to cover our residential.
All right. Let's talking a little bit about residential. Not a lot of changes here in the residential side. Here's some for attic access. Previously, it was just insulate and weather strip them based on whatever the surrounding envelope is. The 2021 IECC has a little bit more detail as far as what those requirements are. Insulation and also if you have a particular area, and the importance of weather stripping that hatch. So basement walls, again, trying to understand and help people understand whether it's inside the thermal envelope or outside the thermal envelope. And so here the IECC is calling out that a basement is not part of the conditioned area and is considered to be unconditioned if you have insulation overhead along with those stairwells and the doors. So again, have we made sure that it is outside the thermal envelope? Ducts for heating and cooling, making sure that in order to qualify, they have to be insulated. And similarly, we don't have supplier returns for that basement area. We don't want to be exchanging conditioned air with that basement if we're saying that it is outside of the thermal envelope. A little bit of updates as far as efficiency of mechanical systems. So your fan efficiency moving up. And the other thing is requiring, we mentioned earlier in commercial buildings that all new commercial buildings will have to be tested. Similarly for residential, all the mechanical ductwork has to be tested now. Previously, as long as it was all within the conditioned space and the air handler was inside the conditioned space, you didn't have to test it. Now they're requiring that those be tested as well. Now it does have a much higher limit as far as air leakage. However, part of what this is working to address is the thought process of, well, as long as it was leaking into the conditioned space, it doesn't matter. The issue you run into is part of your manual D is making sure that the air actually reaches where it's supposed to go. And so if we don't test our ducts and we allow them to leak, however much they care to, there's a high probability that the air won't necessarily reach where it needs to go, leaving those spaces under-conditioned. So also new for the 2021 IECC, you now have to add an efficiency package for compliance with this. Now, if you're doing a performance path, you either have to decrease energy beyond just a base code, or you have to model it without the additional efficiency package, and then you have to go ahead and install one that's not shown as part of your model. So that means that your performance should be better than your model if you've installed this additional efficiency, even though you didn't model it. What some of these efficiency packages are, some of these are improving your building envelope an extra 5%, higher efficiency HVAC, reduced service water heating energy, making sure that you have efficient thermal duct distribution, and potentially better air sealing, along with ventilation, dedicated ventilation system. Here noting that in order to qualify for this, you have to have total efficiency of at least 75%, and energy recovery ventilators have to have at least 50% latent recovery on that too. So a little bit of a higher threshold. And noting here, you have to have ERVs or HRVs. So a supply only or a exhaust only cannot apply for improved air sealing and ventilation credit. Also, we have seen the ERI scores return back to some of their previous levels, back down into these 50, 54 and 55 range, and making sure that we have it documented, that's put it right on the plans and right on the cover page, so you don't have to go digging through to find where this score is. And again, several of these certificates, making sure that you have your ERI score is on the certificate if you're using that. A little bit about the Illinois amendments. Realize this is a big question on a lot of people's mind right now as far as timeline. Presently, the Illinois amendments are slated to go before the Capital Development Board June 14th. After this, it'll be published in the Illinois Register by the Secretary of State's office, which will then begin the 45-day first notice public comment period. Then the Capital Development Board will have the opportunity to address those comments and move on to the second notice and then filing with JCAR. And then JCAR meeting within 45 days of that second notice filing. And based on the information we have at the present time, that would place the effective date at the earliest somewhere October 1st. Now that date will be updated as this moves along the process. It could be further delayed. It could be just a little bit earlier than that. We're anticipating a minimum of a 30-day notice before effective date of that. So fortunately with October 1st, that'll be kind of the tail end of construction, the high construction season. So really we're kind of looking at permits for construction starting for 2023, but it will be based on that permit application date. So that's something to be aware of, that yes, the June 1st date originally anticipated now is looking more like October 1st. So something to be aware of is with this code update cycle, part of this has been as part of the new energy legislation that was passed a couple of years ago. And what this is that local governments will no longer be allowed to enforce energy codes more or less stringent for both commercial and residential buildings. Previously, local governments did have some flexibility on the commercial side, but not residential. Now both commercial and residential are restricted. Now, there are a handful of municipalities out there that still fall under the exception as they had adopted an energy code prior to May 15th, 2009. Now, something that is coming down the pike is the stretch energy code. Municipalities in the future will have the option of either the base energy code or the stretch energy code, and those will be the only two options available to them. So, fortunately, that is not a single election process. So if a municipality decides to adopt the stretch code after 2024, that is perfectly fine to do so. But that option becomes available starting January 1st, 2024. So covering residential, one of the big things is passive house. As this has grown and expanded. If a residential building is being certified under passive house and it is passive house certified, It is done for energy code compliance. Passive house certification is an acceptable method for demonstrating compliance. Also added a fenestration backstop. So even upon trade-offs, you can't have fenestration that is worse than the 2009 IECC. So that is a backstop in there. Insulation requirements, this is one of those where there was a big jump forward in insulation requirements. Illinois is proposing to remove most of those changes and updates, with the exception of the depth for slab insulation. So that is something that you may have noticed or recognized when we were going through some of the other residential things, that the insulation was not in there. And that's because it's an Illinois amendment. So air barrier leakage rate. This is something previously it was a 4 air changes per hour limit. Illinois is looking to drop their amendment and go join the rest of the country at 3. Something to be aware of as you're reading through the code book is the code will put the backstop first before the prescriptive requirement. So as you're reading through the code book, the first number that will jump out at you is it will call out a 5 air changes per hour limit, but that is a backstop regardless of your performance, regardless of the path you're using for demonstrating code compliance. The prescriptive limit is a little further down the page, and it is still 3 air changes per hour. So no building can have more than 5 air changes per hour, and prescriptive compliance is 3. So we do also call out here is whatever your actual test is has to be equal to or less than your modeled. So if your model says 5, your building has to be less than 5. 4 is perfectly fine. But conversely, if your model says you're going to reach a 4 and you reach a 4.5, even though you didn't reach the backstop, you have not complied with your model. Also, Illinois is proposing to add a floor for duct leakage. Understanding as you get very small buildings, trying to reach the very tight limits can be difficult. So there's a floor of 60 CFM for allowable duct leakage. So this is for your smaller buildings. Ventilation controls have to be labeled, including a text or symbol indicating their function. This is one way to do it, is just go ahead and label that switch fresh air. Do people like fresh air? Yes, I would like to keep that on. And similarly, looking to do a ventilation credit. So if you have supplying ventilation directly to each bedroom and at least one of your primary living spaces, be it your living room, dining room, or kitchen, and your system is a balanced system, doesn't necessarily have to be an energy recovery ventilation system or an HRV, but it does have to be a balanced system. So there needs to be either an ERV, HRV, or dual fan system. Can have a credit for that. So on the commercial side, we do have requirements for lighting for plants. There is also something for the in the IECC as far as lighting for plants and plant lighting efficiency. But here for the state of Illinois, noting that we do have for buildings that do have a lot of agricultural or horticultural lighting, do need to have high efficacy lighting for those. Also adding some additional points. Noted earlier, you do have to pick up some additional efficiency points for design construction, allowing some points for grid interconnected or demand response controls for HVAC or hot water or domestic water heating, adding some additional points for that. and also adding a fenestration orientation performance adjustment. So if you have buildings that have a high proportion of their fenestration facing east or west, then you may trigger this performance adjustment and have to improve the solar heat gain coefficient and U factor based on that ratio and that weighting. So with that, I believe we've got a couple more questions here. Municipalities here in the state of Illinois, unless they are one of the select few that are allowed to specify something more. Right now, the base energy code for the state of Illinois is the 2018 IECC. So municipalities that are not enforcing the 2018 IECC, who enforce the building code at all, those do need to move up to the 2021 IECC with state adoption.
We did have a question here referring back to commercial pressure testing and the sampling procedure was how would you test a high rise that's say 50 stories tall to test the floor area under the roof? So the way this will work is it'll be a compartmentalized blower door test. You would isolate that floor, prevent air leakage between the floor below it and that floor. And the way that's done is you would pressurize that floor below probably and the floor you're actually testing so you don't have leakage between those two areas. And then you would just test the leakage coming through the walls and the roof of that upper floor. So it's a bit of an expansion on the test there that you're testing one floor, but you have to pressurize two floors to do it effectively. And the same way for sampling procedures through the building. You pick an area to do pressure testing that's a 25% representation of the envelope. Say you pick an open plan office area, you would pressure isolate that from the rest of the building by pressurizing surrounding connected spaces and then just test the leakage through that particular space. So that's how that would work. Unless you want to get a large whole building blower system and pressurize the whole building.
Similarly, I see we got a question about restaurants and overhead doors with blower door testing. This is where overhead doors, gasketing, and air sealing, it will make that a little more challenging to achieve. Understanding overhead doors generally do have a little bit more leakage to them, but that's where selecting doors and proper gasketing is going to be critical for that. Question regarding electrification, electric versus fossil fuels as far as your sourcing goes. That is not part of the 2021 IECC electrification. That is focused on utilizing energy efficiency regardless of the source. So that is something that the IECC for the 2021 version does not account for. I believe there are proposals to expand the scope for the 2024 IECC to include climate impacts and carbon emissions too. So that's something that has been kept out of the 2021 IECC. As far as our permit question, speaking of Illinois amendments, it is the codes that you are governed by is typically based on the permit application date. So those projects that are already permitted or under construction prior to the effective date would still be under the old 2018 IECC with Illinois amendments, and then new permit applications after that approximate October 1st date would be would be following and enforced under the 2021 IECC with Illinois amendments. So that's where they generally do it based on the permit application date, not necessarily the permit issuance date. But check with your local municipality as far as how they do it.
We did have a couple of questions here about if there's a list of municipalities that have adopted the IECC prior to May of 2009. Um, we have looked for that in the past, and I don't know that we have we located that?
I believe we have located that. It's not a it's not the document that we have located is not terribly clear. So we are working with CDB to try to establish that so we can help call that out. I will say from that document, that list looks to be very short. We're talking, you know, less than a dozen communities, maybe. It's a very short list. So generally speaking, uh, you're going to be on the 2021 IECC. You can always reach out to the local municipality. They should know if they are one of those select communities.
We did have a question if there is an option for plug load controls to substitute an energy plan, as designers are responding negatively to the cost addition of including that plug load control. Um, I have not seen that written into the IECC. I'm not sure if that'll be a future edition, but the main thing with an energy plan that we see as far as commissioning buildings is a lot of times those get disabled. And so those energy savings aren't maintained through the life of the building. And that's where the plug load control, where it's an automated separate system that the users cannot disable, is trying to interact and maintain those energy efficiency over time.
Yeah, something that we've noted is a lot of this is educational, educating the user on some of these, and how we have seen good response from clients is educating customers as far as, hey, these outlets are things that the building is going to remember to turn off. So if you accidentally forget to turn, you leave something on, what do you want the building to remember to turn off for you, when you're gone? So things that, your computer monitor, if you have a little coffee warmer, I've seen many people, they have a little mug warmer that, if I forget to turn this off, let the building remember for me in case. So a lot of education and re-education of customers. A lot of times, yeah, they're just put in without any education, and people are just like, oh my gosh, the building turns stuff off without me knowing about it. And so turning it rather than a headache into a feature of the building has the ability to remember to turn stuff off for you in case you forget.
A question here about installation updates. Are the updates in the 2021 IECC going to be part of the stretch code? The stretch code should have slightly more installation than the 2021 IECC included in it. It's the purpose of the stretch codes is to obtain more energy efficiency than the baseline code. And I don't know that Illinois amendments will target that or not.
Yeah, the stretch code is a performance based code. It is unknown at this time if they will have a prescriptive path with tables and things like that. As far as the stretch code, it is conceivable that it will. The legislation requires that the stretch code be a specific percentage better than a baseline code, and it progressively ratchets up from cycle to cycle. The nice thing about that is the Illinois stretch code will be very similar to Canada's step code, where you can build to a specific, so you can advertise this building is built to the 2030 energy code, because people will already know what that mark is. That is one benefit over the traditional energy codes, because those steps are not in particular known quantities and qualities. So because the stretch code is built on very prescribed steps, you can actually have that conversation with your building owner when, as part of design, is to what energy code do you want to build it to? Do you want to build it to the 2024 or the 2027 or the, the 2035? We can accomplish that for you. So
we did have a question here on the Chicago Energy Code update cycle and what that timeline will look like.
We've had conversations with the city of Chicago. They are working to try to have their update cycle in concert with the state of Illinois. It should be very, very, very close. I know that's something that they've been keeping tabs on the state of Illinois cycle to try to mirror that to the best of their ability. That is something that last time they made a guess and they were off by a month, which, I mean, it happens. So during the previous cycles, city of Chicago went June 1st and the rest of the state followed July 1. That may happen again, but they're working to try to maintain that consistency across. I also see there's a question here as far as that if there is a jurisdiction that is on that list that we will work to try to share to the best of our ability. So if they are one of those select communities, do they not have to update? They do have to maintain that state of Illinois floor. So those municipalities can implement an energy code that is more strict than the state of Illinois' base code. But if they are, if they are presently on the 2018 version and the state of Illinois is moving to the 2021 version, they have to move along with that. So that is one that all that allows them to do if they're on that list is they can have an energy code that is more stringent than the state of Illinois. So.
Well, that appears to be all the questions. We've gone a little bit over in answering them, so we thank you all for sticking with us through the Q&A portion here. If you do have any further questions, again, please reach out to us at energycode@illinois.edu. We thank you all for joining us today. We hope you have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you.